And recording. Hello, everybody, as you're joining. Thank you for attending again to our next of our webinar series. This one is as people are kind of coming in and we're kind of going to get started up. All of you that have attended these before, you've been taking polls as we go, and one of the things that that has been happening because of that is we adjust our material, and the ability to adjust on the fly has been something we tried to keep, and this is one of those. This one is creating a new track map in RayStudio 2 analysis. As we take these polls and what are your future topics that you'd like to see, track maps keeps being right in there at the top or near the top. And at the end of this presentation today, we're going to announce the next webinar, which is also has been adjusted because of your polling. So keep that in mind, and please, it's fantastic that you're helping us and understanding what kind of materials we want to present. It's really being driven by you. So keep that in mind and continue to answer those polls, and it helps us for the future. I do appreciate that. Couple of things that you need to do that we always start off with is the chat box is fantastic. We all enjoy chatting back and forth. I know a lot of you enjoy chatting back and forth with friends that you've met here and friends that you know from before. In that chat box, make sure that you down there near the bottom, when you've by default, it just comes to the panelists, those of us that are answering the questions, and me being able to see those things. Change that to all panelists and attendees. A lot of you are already used to that, but if you want everybody to see it, make sure you change that little pull down to all panelists and attendees. Then we can all see it, and people will not see just the answer. So perfect for that. And then make sure you open up your Q&A box. There's a button there on your little panel. Open up that question and answer box. This webinar is going to be driven a lot by your questions and answers. I've got some stuff prepared. Obviously, we're going to do that. We're going to talk about creating new track maps and in several different ways. But I want to be able to take a look at the Q&A box and adjust and answer some questions while we're going. I wanted this one to be a little bit as interactive as possible. So keep that in mind as we get a little bit closer. So perfect. I appreciate everybody being here. We're the numbers have kind of rolled in, so let's go ahead and get started. We have our normal group of great AIM technicians that are going to be working in the background when you plug in a question and answer, a question into the Q&A box. Keep those as much related to this particular webinar, creating a new track map in RayStudio 2 analysis. Some of the other comments, put those into the chat box if you're looking for bigger, more rounded topics that you're looking at a question for. Of course, contacting us directly after the webinar as well. But if it's something you want to talk about here, make sure you have that Q&A box open and you type in your question there. Those guys are going to be taking care of answering some of those if they don't think we're going to cover them in the webinar series itself, in the webinar today. If not, they'll mark them for me to take a look at, and I'll try to weave those in as we go. So thanks for doing all that. Let me slide one slide ahead here. The track maps. We're gonna attack this from a couple of different angles. The name of the title of the webinar, creating a new track map, is kind of generic. I'm going to start off with why would you want to? We're going to kind of start there, and then we're going to get into the mechanics of actually the dialog box that opens it up and why, what some of those things mean, and talk about. And then we're going to talk about even a little bit deeper, the segmenting of the track map and why would we have certain segments in a certain way? What does it do by default? Maybe what is best for you? Maybe is one track map and just use that forever the right thing to do? It's going to vary on different users and different things, but make sure that we understand that there's different reasons to do things. We're going to try to cover a lot of those things today. Robbie's going to post up in the chat box a couple of videos that we've done earlier that are very much tied to this subject. And while we are going to talk about some of those things, you're going to want to refer back to those videos from previous webinars. One of them is called Track Maps in the AIM Universe. Robbie co-hosted it with me, and Robbie and I talked about, this is a track map. This is a track map inside of RayStudio Analysis, and that's what we're going to focus on today. But there are other track maps in the AIM universe. There's the RayStudio 3 track maps, and there's track maps that you might put on your SmartyCam, and there, there's other things, and there's the GPS-driven line map inside of RayStudio Analysis that we're at right here. But that track maps in the AIM sports universe is a great place if you want to understand some of the different track maps. We're going to focus on this segmented track map here today in this webinar. Robbie's put it up into the chat box. I appreciate that. There is another one that he just put into the chat box as well, and these are hyperlinks, so you can click on those and go save those links or something. But that one is RayStudio 2 split reports. We did that one in early April. That is the function that a lot of people build these track maps for. That, yeah, we want to see where we're at on the track, and it's all dynamically linked with the cursor in our measures window. But the main reason a lot of people use track maps is to be able to use that split report program, that function inside of the software. It does not work until you have a track map built. So that's another one you might want to take a look at. And then there's one other set of videos that I thought maybe you might want to see. James Coburn, who's been a frequent co-host here in our webinars, he's got a whole range of videos, and there are a number of them that are talking about split reports and track maps and some other things. So Robbie's just put a link up right to the playlist area of James's YouTube page, and that is also a great resource for you. There's other ones too, but James has some specific videos about this subject as well. So there are some links for you to get up to speed and take a look. The other thing that you're going to see, we're going to have quite a few slides in the presentation today, and so Robbie's going to put up a link in a little bit where you can download the presentation that I am working through as a PDF file, and you can do it in a moment when you get that link, or when the presentation is done, and have the presentation to watch, to read through, or when you rewatch the video when it's out on YouTube later this afternoon, you'll have the presentation materials in front of you as well. So yeah, there it is. Today's presentation is now in your chat box. So that because we're going to talk about some different things, this presentation has a few slides in it that might help you to be looking at later. Okay, let's jump in with a poll first, and this is just going to let me get to the poll in just a second. The screen that you're looking at right now, I've got it listed as no track map, and what I want you to look at there's just a normal RayStudio 3, I'm sorry, RayStudio 2 analysis screen capture, and I've just got a speed trace up there, and it's some data that we had used in one of Jeremy Lucas's earlier webinars that he helped us with. And but if your eye is looking kind of closely, or if you're used to using RayStudio 2, there's some missing things here. It just doesn't quite look right compared to what it might look like all the time. And if I go ahead a slide, I'm going to point out these areas that if you do not have a track map built, and you can kind of see that there's these four icons across the top. The split over here on the left edge in the primary toolbar, the split times report is grayed out, which again, that is a big part of what a lot of people build maps for, is to use that very function. It's grayed out. There is no track map built. The track report is not available to you. The lap replay is not available to you. And the show track map, of course, icon over in the secondary icon toolbar is not available to you. And the other thing that's not there that you typically will see if you have a track map built and ready to go is this track map segment bar, this green, blue, red segment bar that's across the top, which is showing you where the segments of the track map are being applied to your data. That's not there, right? So when you have no track map built and no track map applied, your display, when you're looking at your data, it probably is going to look a little bit funny to you if you know what you're looking for. And that's really the area, boy, if you got some grayed out icons and no segment bar across the top, that should be giving you a hint that maybe you need to come up and do a map new, right? And build a new one. this is what it should, this is what it will look like if you do have a track map built. So we're back now. Now you see the little bar across the top. You see all these icons that we were just pointing at a moment ago that use the segmented track map as the basis for building and showing those are now colorized, and they're available to you because I do have a track map built here. So the make sure that that's just a tip on how to kind of see where it's at. We're going to go into some other reasons to build track maps here in a little bit as well. If you do not have a track map built, and this is going to be the first half of what we're going to talk about here is the physical part of actually building a track map. And then we're going to get deeper into, well, where do we put our splits and different track maps for different uses. But we want to go through these steps of how to, what all these buttons mean and everything. But in order to open up that dialog box, you go to the map pull down menu and new. Sometimes people will talk about different pieces of software being not too intuitive and being able to understand, okay, well, I see what they're trying to get me to do. Well, this one's pretty good. This is about as good as you can get. Map, new, that's what I want. I want a new map. So I went to the map pull down menu and I hit the new button. When you do that, this dialog box opens up. Okay, and this dialog box is there. It's busy. There's a lot of stuff happening here, and it's kind of interesting. Almost all the time, certainly. Well, let me put that in a different way. All of the time, you could open this up. You could buy all of the defaults that happen here. You could come down into the file name box, give it a name, and click on OK, and you would have the segment reports, all of the different things that we are missing, and you would have a map ready for you to go. Okay, but we want to get into a little bit more detail and how to adjust this to make this work, for you. So we're going to go into this dialog box, and the screen that you're now looking at is looks pretty darn busy, but these are the 10 areas that we're going to talk about today with some detail, and talk about these different areas and what do they do, why would you use them. Some of them you just don't need to use, right? But I want you to know that in a moment. So I'm going to start a poll now with this thought right here, with this screen sitting here, and knowing that there are these 10 pieces of this dialog box that we're going to discuss and talk about and try to answer your questions. I'm going to start a poll. Let me launch the poll right now. If it's in your way, the way it kind of looks on my screen is it looks like you can still see the list of 10 things. This dialog box is asking you, what are the top 3 parts of this track map dialog box that you would like to understand better? It's multiple choice. You could do 4 if you wanted to. You can only do 2. I'm just asking you to do maybe 3 of them. But based on the 10 choices that are on the screen in front of you, what are the sections that you think you have some misunderstanding about? And again, we're going to briefly go over all of them, but based on the results here, we're going to dig in a little bit deeper and give you some background on all of these different things. So we're probably up to about 45% of you have voted for us so far. I'm gonna leave that poll going for probably another minute or so, and get a good idea of what it is really that you like to talk about. We're gonna briefly talk about the whole 2-wheel versus 4-wheel thing, the way it's named, and closed and versus figure 8 versus open and double O. That double O being a fairly new thing that's come along fairly recently in its life. And then file naming, file structure, where we actually store the maps, and some good naming structure things about that as well. Looks like the polling is slowed down a little bit on the numbers. So what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to end it in just a few seconds. If you're in the middle of clicking away, make sure you click and finish up. Just a couple of seconds. We're going to close that, and then of course we're going to share it. We're going to put it right up on the screen, and we'll take a look at what it looks like. So let's end the polling, and let's share the results. Kind of an interesting thing. By far, and I'm going to jot these down so I make sure the corners section, that corner number 1 that labeled as point number 1 is 70% of you are looking for some more information about that, and that's really broken up into two different pieces there. We've got the two-wheel versus four-wheel piece, and then there's the track type, which is the closed, figure eight, open-shaped. We're going to talk. We'll talk about all 6 boxes there in some detail. The next one is at 40%, which is the channel trace view, which is that the thing that's labeled number 10. That is a box that I think is misunderstood by many, and even if they understand it, they do not use it to its fullest. So I am very aware of that. We'll make sure we discuss that quite a bit, which is good. And then the next one is 37, 33. 37 is the track shape. I knew I was going to do that. Track shape slider bar, which is the point number 3. Those adjustments down there. That is one of the probably the most misunderstood, heck, you can try it and see what it does, but you don't know all of the details behind it. So that is a great one to discuss, sliders. Okay, and then let's take a look at the next one, which was actually fairly close, was the modify parts button. The modify parts button, the divide, remove all, and corner 1, 2, and straight buttons. I think those are going to those will be involved because we're going to talk about making different tracks for different uses where we will use that button quite a bit. So modify parts. Okay, I appreciate that. I'm gonna stop sharing those results now, and then let's chat about some of the different areas that you talked about. The next slide. Let me jump ahead one more slide. I kind of assumed that this is probably where this was going to go, so I prepared on especially these 4 buttons here have some folks confused. And even if it's not terribly confusing, it's still, you'd like to see some examples of what do you mean by closed and open, kind of self-explanatory, although I'll show you some examples. Figure 8 and double O can look and feel almost the same, and I want to talk about what those are. So let's talk about those 4, and let's give you some examples of what tracks look like that would use those. So let's go to the next slide. Let's start with a closed shape. This is by far the typical one you're going to have. It is the default that your software is set to when you get there. It is a track. I've used Gingerman here as my example. I went out, I was looking for track shapes so I could do this, pretty quickly in this racingcircuits.info. I want to give them credit for having some tracks that I have used here to use as my example. So I found Gingerman out there, and this is the current track that they have. And it's got the start finish, and then the track direction goes up and around, and you go all the way around, and when you come back, it ties the data points from the beginning of one lap to the end of the next. Our programming ties those 2 together, and there's no change in the heading, right? There's no crossover. Those 2 points, we know they come together. It's a closed course without any crossovers or doubling back on itself as far as changing sides with a bridge or some sort of a tunnel. And so this is, gosh, I don't even know, but probably 95% of the tracks you're going to run into, if not more, is this style, the closed style track map inside of AIM. The next one is called the figure 8, and this one's been in the software forever, and it basically covers tracks like this. This is Suzuka in Japan. And we got the start finish line over here, and the way that this works is it comes down, obviously, and there's a crossover, and then the general shape of the track begins to go more in a counterclockwise way, and then comes and crosses back over, and then goes back into the clockwise way. In a very typical figure 8 style track, right? But there's a crossover. If you try to use that it's a closed track, the software is trying not to have it cross over and generate the track into a shape that looks like what's truly out there, and it will of course struggle. So figure eight is what you use if you have some sort of a crossover, and then half of the track is basically clockwise, the other half of the track is basically counterclockwise. That's the figure eight style. Okay, the next one is, the nice racing site there didn't have a picture of an open track shape, but the open shaped is you just have a start line and a finish line. Maybe it's Pikes Peak. Maybe there's lots of hill climbs here in North America where they start at one point and they finish at another. This happens to be a Dakar rally stage, and so the autocross as well. So anytime you're going to want to build a track map that has a beginning point and an end point, or you went and did some data and you want to do your data analysis and the track is open, you have to select the open style track map. The funny part about this one is this particular little open track here is 227 miles in Peru, and I kind of put it up here on a little bit of a Google Earth kind of a thing. So don't always think of autocross versus Pikes Peak being 20 whatever miles but open tracks can be very long as well. Maybe you put the checkpoints, the visual checkpoints or something as your track segments. So, and then the last one, the one that's the newest in our pull down list, is what we call the double O, and the double O is a modified version of the figure eight, right? But in this particular case, we're using Monza, and this particular layout that I found is the Monza 1922 to 29. The our friends at Emiliano is here from Milan and not very far from this track, and so here you are at the start finish line, and when you take off, you're going basically clockwise, right? You come up here, you turn around, you do the crossover, just like we did at the Suzuka earlier. You cross over, but now when you're doing your run around, you're still in a clockwise version, right? So since it never flipped and went the other way, the software, if you selected figure eight, would get confused. So we've added this double O style where now when it's coming back together, it's adding up to two circles that you've done, or 720 degrees, where it's coming together here. Now the software can calculate this very well if you've told it it's a double O. You're not going to run into too many of these, or of the figure eight, probably too much. The double O, while this is 1929, they stopped running this exact circuit. The where we have run into this lately is in some rallycross. Rallycross tracks will often be in this style, especially in Europe. So so we've needed to bring this back and use this double O. So a question that just popped up: can the open shape accommodate a loop? It certainly can, but what the open shape will do, if we use this, let's say it's a loop like a normal closed track, but you select open. What the software is going to do is it's going to use all these GPS gyro or lateral G sensors. We're going to talk about that in a second, but it will not try to force the two ends together. So you're going to end up with a little bit of float where if you use the closed track style, it's going to make sure that that front straightaway lines up together and everything is good. If you leave it on open, you're going to see a little bit of the drift of the accelerometers of the gyro data. So that's how that works. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to jump out to some live data, and let's start looking at a little bit more detail of what this would look like. Okay. So what I've done is I've brought up Gingerman, the track that I used a moment ago to demonstrate a good closed track model. And I want to talk about, let's start right off with a little bit more detail of some of the questions that you guys have asked. Again, there's no track map attached to this. That's why you're seeing some of these grayed out icons, right? So the first thing I mentioned is, most of the time, if you go to Map and New, and you see this pops up, it's going to take, we're going to talk about these other two things that is real big on the poll. We're going to talk about these in a second, but I want to build just a generic map first. If you just allow the software to come in, Map New, plug this in, I'm just going to call it AA test one, we'll talk about that more in a moment. It picks the best lap that you have, which is almost always a good choice for building a map. It sets all of these things at default values as far as when does it start a corner, how open or closed is the track. All of those things are pretty darn good right out of the box. We're going to talk an hour today about how to build track maps, but if you really want one and you just want to do it, boy, jumping in here, map new, give it a name, click on OK. Okay, there now we have the track map segments are across the top here. The track map icon works. We can open it up. We can resize that bugger a little bit if we wanted to. Put it down here in the corner, and we now have the ability to, wherever I put my cursor, you see the track map is working and you are off and running. It can be that simple, that quick. We're going to get into more complexities and get in there and understand how to adjust and move things around. So that's very, very good with what we can do. But I want you to all know that boy, if you just need a track map built real quick to know where you're at and get some general track segment shapes for a segment report, map new, put in a name, click on OK. You're going to get something that's worth working with. So, okay. Now let's go back in. I'm going to close that track map just so it's out of the way, and let's jump in and let's take a look at a little bit more detail. So map new. Let's just jump right back in, and here we are back to that screen where we talked about. Let's go over a few more of these topics that you mentioned in the polls. We talked about closed, figure eight, open shaped, and double O as far as the track types. The software is not going to change that. Wherever it was the last time you did it is what's going to be selected when you come in. The very first time you ever load the software, closed is going to be the choice. So pick the one that works for you, but closed is, again, like I mentioned, probably 99% of the time it's going to be closed. These two buttons here are they're not very intuitive, right? So it's because the software is a little bit old, and it was back in the day when you only had gyro data. Typically, you only had gyro data if you had a motorcycle, if you had something with two wheels. So the two-wheel part is not so important for you to look at, but rather which channels it's going to use to create it, and you can select one of these two. I'm going to tell you nowadays with virtually all of our systems being used with GPS sensors. With a GPS sensor, we are creating, as you can see it over here, we're creating a GPS gyro channel. And because that channel is there when you have a GPS sensor on board or built into your Solo or some of your other devices, but if it's got a GPS sensor built into it or attached, this really is your best choice almost always. Okay, it's using the speed the speed trace, and mainly because it's a rollout distance, converting that into how far along the track are you. And then it uses the GPS-based gyro data, which is super accurate and doesn't need to be calibrated or anything. So it almost always works right out of the box. You don't have to do anything else. So you typically use the two-wheel, even if you have a four-wheel car, right? So don't get hung up on the two-wheel part versus the four-wheel part. It's really because you're wanting to use this speed sensor data and gyro data. And then the second one is, of course, we label it as four-wheel just because of in the past, that's typically where it was at. We had a speed sensor, same speed sensor, and the ladder accelerometer, which we have as well over here. But I'm going to tell you that typically your gyro data is going to give you a better track map. So for most of you, hang right in there and use closed and two-wheel, which is typically default, and you're going to be in good shape. Hopefully we've answered a little bit about what that is. The next one that's attached to that I do want to show you was your fourth place in the poll, which was this view up here, the track. I'm sorry, the channels view trace. This piece up here. We've got a blue line and we've got a green line. And at first you just look at that, no, yeah, it's just another strip chart of data, and some of you don't use it maybe all that often, but it is dynamically linked with the map, and it is showing basically the data that you have here. It's showing the blue is a speed trace. Here's where you're accelerating up the front straightaway. Right here is where the driver hit the brakes to get ready for turn one here. And then of course where it drops down, that's just a speed trace, just like normal. That is pulling speed out of the car. And then and then of course the apexes are all these dips, and the acceleration zones are all heading up. The green line is the lateral G sensor. You know, when are you turning? And you can tell that as you come along, it's green, it's flat through the middle here, and then all of a sudden it dips down. And for this left-hand corners are going to be down below the middle point of this trace, and right-hand corners are going to be up here above. And here he's turning to the right over here, right? So this is giving you a good idea of when you're accelerating and decelerating on the brakes and on the throttle, and where you're turning the steering wheel back and forth. This is a fantastic tool that we're going to use in a moment to help us divide this up maybe in different spots than where the AIM software does it for us. So that's what that box is for, is it's really showing us the, you know, where the speed and the lateral G or the gyro is actually changing the direction here. So keep this in mind as we're walking through the rest of our hour here, talking about different ways. I'm going to use this box quite a bit to build some segments. Okay. The other thing that was talked about a lot was this modify parts box down here. This is the next place that we'll chat about, and then we'll come back to the track shape and channel threshold. So if I wanted to, as we did it when we first started, when we created this track map that's segmented across the top, all we did is just came in and gave it a name, and boom, the AIM software Race Studio Analysis has taken and looked at all of this data, the acceleration zones, the turning, the gyro, if we got that one selected. And it looks at this and it goes, anytime we're in a straight section, we have stopped the cornering segment, and we've put a little break right there, and we've created a straight segment before the next corner, and we've made that green. Greens are straightaways typically. Green is go, right? So if you kind of think about it that way. And then we've got corners, and it looks like they're just alternating, you know, red and blue, right? But there is a little bit of smarts behind that. If it's a right-hand turn, the AIM software is giving that a color of red. If it's a left-hand turn, it's giving it a color of blue. It's not using it any deeper than that, but for you looking at a map real quickly and looking at these segment colors across the top here, blues are left-hand turns, and reds are right-hand turns. Greens are based, just generally speaking, are straightaways. We're going to look at it in a minute and give you even a better way of maybe making this even more accurate to whatever you're after. If you just want acceleration zones, or you want segments of the track, or you want all of your corners defined, we'll talk about that in a minute. So keep that in mind, okay? And that's when we want to remove some of these. Maybe AIM has gone in and has created a segment in here that maybe we don't want it, right? Maybe this corner, here, I don't want that, or I want to divide it up even more. All of these parts, this modified parts area down here, I can either change the color of that one by clicking on it. We'll start at the other end, and I can just click on it once. It just turned it green. If I click on it again, it turns it red, and I click on it one more time, it turns it blue. It really is just a three-way toggle, and it's changing whichever one you have clicked on. I clicked on that one, and then I can just toggle through the three different colors, right? Okay, so that's what that first one does. The next one can remove, we'll do remove first, we'll do remove all in just a second. So I've got this remove button. If I don't want that one to be a segment, this blue one, I drive this, maybe, you know, and I want to see what my time is all the way from there, all the way to the braking zone for this one. So I click on that one, and I remove it. What removing a segment does, and this is you might want to focus on this and make a note, or at least a mental note, is what I just did is I clicked on that blue segment and I removed it. What it always does is it takes the one you clicked on to remove, and it adds it to the one behind it. So what really happened, and you can't see it very well here, but I'll prove it here in a second. What it does is it takes that piece that we took away, just this one left-hand corner here, and it added it to this green segment back here. So if I come in here and I change the color of that, you can see that it actually changed it all the way up to just up to here. It didn't add it to the corner ahead of it. It always adds it to the piece behind. Okay, so you can see that there's that blue piece, and then it came up here, and now this is all just one piece, because it took just this one piece that I had here and it adds it to the piece behind it. The previous segment is what happens when you do the remove. It adds that. If I were to do it on this blue one here, it would extend this green one all the way up to this segment point here. keep that in mind as you remove. Sometimes it's better to start at the beginning of a lap and start to remove what you don't want or build new ones, and it always adds it to the previous one that you've already kind of adjusted. So keep that in mind. The remove all. The remove all ends up just being, I've got all these little segments and I just want to remove them all, and I want to build my own. Boom, clicked on that. We now have a track with one segment and it's all green at this point. And so we could come in anywhere I click and I could change the color. It's just going to change it all because there are no segments. It's setting it up where you and I can come in and create our own segments wherever we wish. Okay. If you ever get lost, confused, you've clicked on some things and you're going, oh man, you don't even have to bail out of the entire data, this function. Go up and just pick another channel. And as soon as I pick another lap, and as soon as I click on and go back to that first lap again, it goes all the way back to all the default settings, okay? All the default segment breaks that AIM has set up for you. So that's another great little thing. Well, you get in there, you're tweaking around, darn it, let me just reset it by going back and just selecting a new lap and coming right back in, okay? And then when we want to, I'm gonna remove all again just for fun. And then the bar above is not changed because we have not applied this map. We are working in like a little interim stage here. There was a question, but the bar above does not change. It hasn't changed yet because until I get these segments where I want, give it a name, and as soon as I click the OK button, that new map has now been applied. So as of right now, that original map is still working until we get through this stage of creating and saving a new map. Okay, so now I've taken them all out. Let's just kind of look at this and let's build a track map of wherever we decide to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm looking at this, and maybe some people will say that AIM puts too many. I'm going to bring them back in. Some people will say that maybe there's a few too many segments that ends up being built in an AIM track map factory default settings here. We'll talk about these in just a quick second and show maybe another way to do this. But as you see this, maybe this big long right-hander here, it did not make a track segment there. We can come in and create that by sliding the corner identify button slider bar. And what that is doing is it's just saying, what threshold do we call it a corner or not? Some of you that just maybe think that there's just a few too many track segments, maybe you don't want to remove them all, come down, use the corner identify slider and make more longer. This blue, this basically just a kink here is now a corner because we've told it, we're pretty sensitive on turns. If we want to go the other way, we take that slider bar, we go way over here, and we end up with very, very few, and the corners are very short, and there are very few of them, right? So the straightaways are longer and the corners are smaller. So that corner identify slider bar is just adjusting at what rate on the lateral G or the gyro sensor, depending on which one you have selected, is it saying, this is a corner, this is not. So that's the corner identify button. The track shape, we'll go through these while we're here. The track shape button, if we slide that back and forth, you see that it looks pretty darn good right off the bat. Let me, behind the scenes here, let me Control 2, I've got a user profile set up here. This is what the GPS map driven line shows this track as being, right? And if I turn the per lap color off, maybe we can't do that right now. You can kind of see the shape of this of the driven line map versus what the calculation of what the cartoon or the calculation of what the track looks like in the track map building process. So we can see that the shape is pretty darn good. There's a rotation here. We'll talk about that in a second, but the shape is actually pretty darn good. If we want to change that shape, and this is rarely has to be done nowadays, because what the track shape slider bar that we're going to talk about next really does is for especially older accelerometers that maybe weren't as good as what we're using these days, or it wasn't calibrated correctly. We can slide this and it changes what the accelerometer thought it saw, right? So we can open it up where it's deadening it out quite a bit, or we can make it super sensitive where it's actually crossing over. Typically, you're not going to need to do the track shape anymore. Boy, back in the day, we had to adjust that a little bit. Especially still, even today, we may have to do a little bit of that if you use the four wheel where you're using the lateral and you're on a highly banked track, the Daytonas, or some of these Rovals where we're actually out on the oval track where it's banked real heavily, and then we go down inside, the accelerometers get a little confused because it's using true accelerometers, not necessarily the GPS data, if you use the four wheel button. If you're using the gyro based one, it's not, again, I'm finding it to be very, very darn close most of the time right out of the box. That's what the track shape button does. You can either grab the slider and move it just back and forth a little bit, or you can hit the button and it goes just a step at a time. So you can go left and right. Again, I'm gonna go back to my default values, and that default values button, one of the another ones we were talking about, that is just resetting these three, and I even believe the rotation. These four sliders go back to what AIM thinks the default value should be. Okay, and then the channel threshold. Channel threshold, if you watch as I'm sliding that, you can see that these straightaways are becoming more straight. The channel threshold is taking that lateral G or that gyro value, and it's tweaking it, so when you come out of a corner, boom, we're on a straightaway, and it doesn't give you that slight little bit or that little kink. The more I throw that, it's straightening out all the straightaways and making the corners much more defined this way. Again, typically that channel threshold was for when we had maybe sensors weren't as good or they weren't calibrated. But especially when you're in the two-wheel one and using the GPS-based gyro, that typically is not going to need to be slid. These upper two rarely are going to be used nowadays, unless you want to. But the corner identify might. If you think AIM is giving you too many corners, slide that and back and forth and take some away or grab some new ones. So those are that's kind of that area of the software as well. The other thing is this map does not match this map as far as rotation, right? The shape looks really darn good, but the rotation's not quite right. Understand that when this track map function was built, we didn't have GPS. We did not know which direction was north, right? We were basing it all on rollout distance from a triggered start lap point. And then all we had was the accelerometer, and when you're heading up the straightaway, some tracks it's not, but most you're on, it's near 0 G's laterally, and you run up and then you start to turn the corner. It sees the G's build and it knows how deep it is into the track, and it starts to turn. So what the programmers have done in this side of a track map is basically the straightaway that the start finish line is on is almost always horizontal on your screen, and it's almost always at the top. And then they start their process of either counter or clockwise or counterclockwise and come around. So the reason that it orients this way, and you'll find this in your data, is that the straightaway where the start finish line is on is almost always horizontal across your track map screen, and then it runs around and then connects back in. But in reality, at the track level with GPS now, we always try to post our GPS maps always start with north being straight up. Up to you. I call this the dad view often. Sometimes I like to put where we all stand and watch the track, from the pit lane, or for the pits in a karting race or motocross race. So maybe you want this over here on this side. So all you got to do is grab the slider down here, the rotation slider, and turn. I'm just dragging it along, and maybe that's the orientation that you see in your mind's eye of the track. I'm trying to go just a little bit more, where you come down and turn one is, and you're pitting here, and this is the way that you normally think of the track, even though north is due opposite of what we're actually showing here. If you want it that way, the software doesn't care, right? Rotate it however you wish with the rotation bar. If you want it to match, and this is something I tend to do a lot, is I tend to come over here and I tend to just open up my GPS map like I've done here, and I tend to just match it. Just so if I have one open or the other, I'm an old surveyor. That was my job prior to this for 25 years. North up works for me, but so I tend to just do it that way. But if you have other ways you want to see it, you are free to do that. So and then the other one is, and again, one that we rarely have to use anymore, is let's say you are using the lateral accelerometer again, not a GPS valued gyro. you're using your lateral G sensor and you installed your data logger is in such a way that negatives are in one, instead of negatives for left-hand corners and positive for right-hand corners as far as your lateral Gs, you've got them backwards. You've got them flipped for whatever reason. Your track map will come out looking backwards, right? If the G sensor is backwards, we are going to build the track map absolutely backwards from the way that it actually is out on the road. That I got it that way because I clicked on that mirror button. If this is what your data looks like, and you know turn 1 doesn't turn to the right, you know it turns to the left, like here, and your accelerometers or your gyro is backwards, and you just have to click the mirror button. And now all of a sudden, the track will be right. Again, though, a function that with current loggers and the data that we have nowadays, it is very rare that you need to use the mirror button. Okay. And then finally, now that we've kind of gone over some of those, and I'm going to watch the chat and watch the Q&A, I want to do the next step, which is, gosh, let's use that bar across the top, those little strip charts, and go, let's build a track map that works for us, works for you, right? Instead of using the AIM default values, let's build one where we are ending up with track map segments, maybe only 3, maybe 4 segments for the entire track, because I don't want to know every corner. What I really want to do it is the way that you would drive a track, right? You leave the start finish line, you come up here, and this left-hander and this right-hander really end up being driven by you as an entire segment of the track, right? You don't physically stop and think, okay, well, I just finished that left-hander, turn 1. Now I'm going to go into turn 2, and we think of that as a totally different corner. It's really a one motion kind of a corner, even though you're turning left and right. So maybe this entire upper segment up here, this is a short little straightaway, maybe from where we hit the brakes here, coming into turn 1, all the way until we get to, we open up our hands in the middle of this little big long curving straightaway here. Maybe that's one segment, and I want to know how long it takes me to get through that in a segment report for all of my different data, and end up with this being one segment, and then this entire segment up to braking for this guy here. And then maybe this corner is really important to me because of the long back straightaway, so we want to make that one corner. And then we come down here and we run it all the way to the finish line. So let's get rid of all of the AIM segments that it built for us by default. And then now we know we want to stop right in this area somewhere for braking, right? But boy, looking at the track, I don't know exactly where the braking was. So what you do is you come right up here. That cursor line is the same spot as this. They're dynamically linked. And question being, boy, can we adjust this start finish line? We cannot, not in this function here. If that is important to you, you need to adjust that start finish line. You need to bail out of this, go back into your GPS lap insert function, change the start finish line of your data, and then come back into here, and then the start finish line will be where it is in your data. So no adjusting it right here, but if you need to, the workaround is to change it with the GPS coordinates and then come back into here. So now I'm looking for, where do I want my segment to start or end here? And this is a definitive piece of track mapping, and something you really ought to think about is, gosh, the closer you put, and I'm going to get the cursor out of the way and just use my pointer. You see the acceleration zone comes up and the deceleration starts. The closer you put that to exactly that transition, and then you as a driver later on using this map where you have split it right where you hit the brakes, maybe one time you go 15 feet deeper into the corner, maybe one time you brake a little earlier because you're kind of backing up the corner to get a late apex or something. The trouble is, if you put that split in our maps right at the spot where you do that transition, anytime you change your position where you do that, you're kind of tricking the segment reports, your theoretical best lap. All of these things become a little less accurate for you because the transition is right when you're transitioning out on the track. My suggestion to you is to look at that blue line up here, which is your speed trace, and right there is where you transition. Go back just a little bit where you know you're on acceleration always when you're going to hit the brakes there, right? You're always going a little past where we actually drive this, and then you get the last 20, 30 feet. I'm going to show you a different way of doing this in a minute. The last little bit of of acceleration before you hit the brakes, but we're always beyond it when we start that transition. So I pulled this black line back just a little bit, and now I want to divide that right there because that's where certainly still on the throttle at that point. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to divide that. Boom. Let me get the cursor out of the way. I've got this now where driver's coming off of the lap before all the way straight past the start finish line is not moving. So we've got this little segment here. It's always acceleration. Then what I wanted to do, remember we wanted to come over here somewhere. Now we need to make this decision of where do we want this to be? And again, acceleration zones, we don't want to be at either the V's or the U's at the bottom, and we don't want to be at the peaks at the top. And also we want to try to stay away from that heavy transition time. So this looks like a really good spot where you've done this hard right-hand turn, you've opened your hands up, and you're starting to move the car over a little bit before you actually do this this harder left-hander right ahead of us. Maybe back in here where you're right when you've opened your hands up, plus a little bit more to stay away from transitions again of all types. That might be a great spot. Then we can report in our split reports exactly how much time we spend in this whole section here. So let's divide it there. Pop. Okay, it created a red one, and another one. Maybe we want to have this first little one be it's a straightaway, so I like to have it to be green. So I clicked on that, and then if I click off of that, it's blue now, and now I've turned it into a green segment. This one here, now it's not going to really match well the red equals right, blue equals left's normal way of looking at things, right? Because it's a left-hander and two rights. So just pick a color, and then the next one we will pick the alternating color for the next little segment we're going to build. So I'm going to leave that one red. Then the next place I want to break it up, if we just kind of think about this, maybe it's, as we talked earlier, maybe it's just before braking for this important back corner here where we're going to get onto this long straightaway. We really want to be able to break down that corner specifically. So I look up here and I look at, do we want it right at the peak? Not. I want to pull it back just a little bit so we're always hitting the brakes before the track segment, and or still on the throttle at the segment brake, and then hit the brakes after the segment brake. So I just moved it back a little bit here, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to divide that one. It made it red, so I'm going to click anywhere in it, and I'm going to hit the little corner button, and I'm going to change it to blue. Again, I'm just looking for alternating colors at this point because we're not going to follow that convention of right-hand turns are red, left-hand turns are blue, because we're making segments the way you would drive the track. Okay, then I want to come on the exit out. So I'm just going to put the cursor in here close. And what I really am looking for is, we certainly don't want it here at the transition of speed, right, where the driver is getting back to the throttle while still turning like crazy, the driven apex. But what we really want to do is look at, maybe you bring it all the way down here to when the driver opened their hands. The G-forces are up by the green line. It comes down, and then it starts to flat line. It looks like he held his hands a little bit and then went again. So, but right about where he ended the hard cornering part, maybe that's where I want it. And then we want to stay just a little off of the transitions of either way. So I'm going to come up just a little bit more, and that's where I want to know how much time that I spend in that little segment there. So let's divide it out, and it assigned it a red color, which is alternating from what we had. So good. Then the next one we want to come down, if we want to. Maybe we want this acceleration zone to check horsepower things we change on. Maybe it's gearing, maybe it's tunes or jetting changes, or just true acceleration. I'm going to come, and here is where we hit the brakes on this lap. Again, I'm going to pull it back just a tick, and I'm going to divide that there. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to make it green because it's a straightaway. And then we've got this last segment. Let's just change the color just for fun. Let's make it blue. Let's just leave that. I mean, you could come up and make a corner out of it, and then a little piece of a straight. But let's make this whole thing one more timed segment. We spent some time there, but what we did is I walked around the track the way that you might want to for your style of track map that you're after, right? And we use this bar across the top, these little strip charts, to understand and stay away from transition areas, so our split reports will be very, very consistent. Our theoreticals and our best rolling laps, all of that will be a much better representation of what is happening because we stay away from those transitions. So I built this map. Again, as the questioner talked about earlier, we had this map that we already had attached. This is not there yet, but I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it 2.2, and then track. And we'll talk about why maybe in a minute. I'll show you the function now that I'm trying to make work for me. And so I'm just going to call that something, and you would name it. Normally, you would name it Gingerman, June. Normal segments or something that would remind you of exactly what it is in the name, because I'll show you where these are all stored here in a minute. And then you click on OK. Now you can see that there's a little straightaway here, that the little green segment that we did. Let's open up the map so we can see it. Let's make it a little bit bigger so we can all see it, and I'll try to pull it off here over the side. Now we've got that little green segment that we just built, was from the start finish line until just before the driver hit the brakes. We've got this red segment that is all of this, where the driver is taking that first left, the two rights, that whole segment of the track. You drive thing in segments typically. And then you've got this whole blue segment here where it's what we can see in our track map here and by the lines above. And now if I go over here and I click on the split time analysis button, let me bring that down a little bit so we can see it all. Now we've got a pretty darn good report that shows the amount of time based on the track map we just built. How long was the driver in this red segment over here for all of these laps? 29 seconds, for 29.2, 29.5, 20, and 29.3. We've got our best theoretical lap versus our actual best driven lap of 147 versus the theoretical 146.8. You can see how those are fairly close together and much more representative of what the driver theoretically can do, because we stayed away from those transitions with our segment brakes. The AIM software doesn't always do that. It's not thinking that direction. It really is only being based on when you're rotating the car and roll out distance, and so it always puts the brakes where that gyro channel is asking it to. So by coming in and creating these segments where we want, this report becomes much more powerful. Okay, and as Robbie posted earlier, there's a video on how to read these split reports in much more depth, and maybe he'll link that again here in just a second. Okay, let me close the split report down, and let me show you one more kind of cool little trick. I'm going to get rid of the GPS map real quickly. Another little trick, and we're getting close to the end of this, but I wanted to make sure I touched upon it, is sometimes what I just did in the map new, let me open it up real quickly. Remember, I went in here and I was just glancing at that one lap and understanding, where I wanted to create these splits based on staying away from transitions. Another thing that's just fantastic for you to do is open up a number of laps, and this way you never is even a better way of understanding where these splits happen. Since we're going to use rollout distance, which is based on speed, and we're going to use the GPS gyro channel, I'm going to bring both of those up, right? And now, if I put my cursor right here, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so we can actually see it a little bit better. Here's that braking zone that we kind of, by using this map new button, I kind of guessed where that was here, right? As best I said, well, here's the braking for that one lap, and I went back a little. If for you, this affects me, by the way, if you're not comfortable with that lack of precision, it just doesn't feel right to just, I'm just going to pull it back this 1/16 of an inch on my screen here. I'm going to cancel out of that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and look at my data file here, and I'm going to look at, these are all peak mile per hour. So clearly I'm hitting the brakes, always hitting the brakes a little bit earlier here, or look at the exact traces, and bring your cursor in and find the spot where, with all of your laps, and typically the way you drive in your car, where you're hitting the brakes. And what you can do is, by putting the cursor there, you end up with a number up here that says 327.8. Let's just call that 325, right? 325 feet is about where I know I'm always on the throttle still, and it's staying away from this transition. Then you go around and maybe you wanted one here where this transition happened here. And now I can see exactly when that happened. I can zoom in a little bit. And boy, if I want to stay away from this last little bit of the transition, I could come to there maybe. And I could look at that and it's 3025, let's say, right? And just walk our way around the lap of where we want to be even more specific, because we have multiple laps up. We can see what we did in a bunch of laps. If we want to do this braking zone, we could pull it back. And 37, I tend to round a little bit, but maybe it's 3770, and write them down. Write them down as you just walk your way around the entire track by clicking where you might want. Oh, this is a good one. Let's look at this one. This one I screwed up on. You see this? The blue segment is where I ended it. On the lap I had looked at was only the fastest lap, which was the blue one. I assumed that we were always on the brakes, but look at this. Several other laps, I'm actually hitting the brakes earlier than the segment as I did it. So what I would do is I would come back here, put the cursor back here where I know I'm still on the throttle, and that is at 73.72, right? So maybe we adjust that track map at some point. But another great way of checking and making sure your splits are falling where they belong. Okay. So when armed with my new knowledge of all the different places I want to split it, we're not going to take the time to do it 100%, but then you come back into your map, new, and we're going to use that last feature that a lot of people ask about that I haven't talked about yet, which is let's remove all of these aim splits that were done for us. Let's just get rid of them. And now we have walked around the track and we know exactly how many feet along we want to have splits, right? The first one being, I wrote down 2 of them. So we come down into this box and we type in 325, because that's where the braking zone actually kind of happened a little bit better. And we move to it. It has to round to the next nearest data point. So it pulls back to 324, put the cursor right about where I told it to, and I'm going to divide it. Then the next one was 3025. 3025 from our walk around in the analysis screen and writing down the numbers. And we're going to move to that one right there. And I'm going to divide it. Okay, now I could come in and change these colors. Cursor covers it, so I'm always a little bit nervous. And then remember, it was a red one. This time we'll make it a blue first segment. Your choice on the colors, obviously. And then we would have worked our way around the track and doing it by plugging in this distance, move to, then divide, recolorize, and in the end you save that one, and boom, you've got a track map built the way you want with some more accuracy based on looking at the data. Okay, perfect. I've been watching the questions a little bit. I haven't seen a ton. I see there's lots of great chatting going on in the chat box, and I love that. So, but have a couple of questions as I'm kind of going to tidy this up now. How can I align my segment parts to my splits in the GPS manager? That one's a little bit more difficult. In fact, I've got he might be on here today, but there's a fellow that contacted me and wants to do that very thing. What we can't do is I can get fairly close, right? By coming in here and looking at where I'm at on the track and trying to figure out where the splits are. But really the best way to maybe do that is I'm gonna help this other customer. I think he's in Denmark. Netherlands maybe, is build a track map based on Robbie and our video we did earlier, the GPS, track maps in the aimsports universe. Build a track map in Race Studio 3 for the hardware where we know we have those known GPS coordinates. The location coordinates we can type them in there and build it. And then your splits can come in and we will be able to see those hard-coded splits in some channel reports and some other things in Race Studio 2, and then pick those up and build a track map that matches it. But right now, we do not have a channel here that has our GPS coordinate values of wherever I put my cursor. So it's a little bit hard to create the exact same splits that we have in our GPS manager. But if you have them there, we can come across and see them in a split report and some other channel reports and break it down by those and actually see it. So maybe that's a great advanced topic that we can take a look at later. How can I align my split parts to my? Oh, that's a question we just chatted about. Emiliano may add a little bit more to that in the Q&A document that we attach later. So the last part I want to show you is the once we get done with all of this, I just canceled out of that. There was one more option up here that I wanted to talk about. Number one, you can show your track map with Shift F1. It's the same as pushing this button over here to show the track map, or you can hit the Shift F1 button and show your track map, or you can come up to Map and show track map. Okay, but the one I wanted to show you here is if you have a track map that you have built in the past and you want to attach it. And so if you come in here and go Map and then Map Manager, you can come into this dialog box. And now you see why I named them here. This is always alphabetical, numeric, then alphabetical. So I didn't want to have to go search for a track map. So so I started one of them with 2 track and then AA test 1. These are the track maps that we just built. And since they are all stored, and if you select Open Maps folder, you'll see that it'll open. You're not going to be able to see it since I'm only sharing the document, but it opens up a folder, and all of these files, these little tiny map files, they got an MP extension inside of your Race Studio map folder, and they're tiny, right? And that's why you need to give each one an individual name, because they are all being stored into a single folder. That's why you can't just say Gingerman, and then you come back and you want to build a new one for Gingerman that maybe had a different braking zones or a couple more segments or just 3 segments like an F1 track or something, and you name it Gingerman, a dialog box is going to open up and say, that track already exists, do you want to overwrite it? And you're having to give things a little bit different name. So I tend to, when I build a track map, I give it something specific. This is a map just for braking segments, right? So I end up generating a track map just into the braking and ending it just before I start to trail brake, and then I end up with split reports with just braking data. Or I have one that's just acceleration zones, or I have one that's more of a driver related where we drive through segments. But you need to name those all slightly different. And let's say that we have once we have 3 or 4 Gingerman track maps of different ways I want to break the data down in split reports, you come into the map manager and I want to load this 22 track now. So I highlight it and load for open tests. And it will change that track map and instantaneously. I think I already had it loaded. So let me do the other one. Let's do this one and load for open track maps. There you've seen the bar change across the top. That new track map, that old but now newly attached track map, is what's used. You can share these with your friends if you come up with a track map that is just works really well for your particular track. Your theoreticals calculate well, and you got the segment reports the way you want without a whole bunch of these. You can come up to that map manager, and you can highlight the one you want, and you can export it, and then hand it to your buddy with email or whatever on a thumb drive, and then the next person can import that existing track map into their folder, and then from then on you guys have the same track map to share back and forth if that's something that you're after. So okay, perfect. I don't see any other questions that I haven't touched on yet, and let's talk about that. Let's jump out. Let me reshare the presentation materials, and we can kind of end with that. Any more questions you have, obviously, I'll give you my contact information, or we'll continue to answer some of the stuff that was asked in the past in the Q&A. So we're always out here. These videos that we're doing 2 a week, these webinars are going straight to our YouTube site, and it's listed there. Tons and tons of videos there, and of course all of these are happening there as well. Rewatch those and search for some other videos. We're a support company, right? We're out there supporting you with the hardware that you've purchased from us, and we want to make sure that both hardware, software, we have a great group of techs that I'm proud to be part of, that we are out here helping you, get the most from your investment in the product. So make sure you give us a holler. The guys are, and myself too, hopefully be at the track soon. I know we've already had our visits have started, so we're happily seeing a lot of your smiling faces out there at the track, and hope to continue to see more. So looking forward to that. The next webinar The next webinar we're going to do, I mentioned earlier that we had adjusted a little bit here and there based on those polls, and I'm gonna throw one more up here just really quickly right now because it kind of ties together. Is the next webinar is going to be the understanding configurations. Part of what we were getting as far as the future webinar topics, I'm gonna start this poll. It's gonna kind of pop up in the way, but while I'm finishing this, we'll let you vote on the top 3 future webinar topics. You can vote for more than 3 if you wish, but I hope you'll leave it at 3. The track maps and configurations had continued to be something that a lot of people were asking for in these polls and in emails and phone calls. So we really do watch this and adjust. We're going to have a new co-host for this one. It's a fellow that's been in the back answering questions a lot as you've been watching these webinars. Robinson Shea is gonna come up front and be the co-host for this. Co-host in our world is I get to sit back and relax and have somebody else do all the work. Not really, but Robinson is preparing for this. We're going to do it. This will be the next one. It'll be on Tuesday, June 9th. We've talked about some of these tabs that you're seeing here on your screen a little bit earlier. We've talked about the downloading. And Matt Romanowski talked about shift lights and alarms. And so, some of these we're going to skip over fairly quickly if we've done them before. But we're going to go, assuming that you have a gauge, and you're going to go through and you're going to and you need to configure it. We're going to go through these tabs and talk about what's important to you, and how to do some of the basic steps of these configurations, making sure you understand it. We won't go through every single step, but we're going to talk about how you can basically understand them, what all the terms mean, and configuring a device in Ray Studio 3. Most of you have voted. I'm going to end that polling in just a moment and then share it with you on our way out. So let's end that polling and let's share those results real quickly with you so you can see them. Data analysis, we all understand that is a big part of what everybody comes to these for, and we're going to continue to do that. We're going to try to sneak in some of these other things that are really important to people as we do it. Data analysis, 65%. Configurations, second place, as has been a lot lately. Second place again at 50%, and we're going to talk about that on Tuesday with Robinson. The next one it looks like is ECU protocols. So we do have a couple of open dates in the month of June, and some of you, probably all of you, got an email from me recently. I extended the date of the ending date of this chain of webinars through the middle of July. That's a date that it's out there a little ways, but it's not way out. We're still trying to figure out as we continue these. Is it the dates and the times? Do they work for people as we start to get back out and working and racing and doing things? Is Tuesdays and Thursdays at this time of the day good? So I didn't want to extend it way out, but we did extend it. Some of you seen that. All of you seen that email. So we're going to continue on at least through the middle of July with these, and some of these ECU protocols. We got a couple of weekends, and I'd love to do a quick one with our my cohort Robbie and chat about just some of the basics of ECU protocols. And some of the other ones are there. You see them. So I'm going to stop sharing that device. The poll results, and we'll jump into our final slide. We went over a lot in a hurry, and I realize that we do that, always do that with our webinars. Throw a lot of information at you because we know we're recording them and we know they're going to end up on YouTube in about an hour. If you have any questions, go back and watch the video, or there's my my contact information. Give me an email, a phone call, whatever, and let me answer a few more questions. And we always, of course, have the rest of our text as well. So that is it for today. We're going to prepare and get ready for configurations on Tuesday with Robinson. Thanks everybody for attending. I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Talk to you soon.